Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aliah Aprilianti and I'm from class 4B. So for this video, I will share about learning planning on English language teaching in phase F. So we move to the next slide. It's about the introduction. So the Merdeka curriculum was developed as a more adaptive curriculum framework as a part of an educational reform initiative with a focus on essential content and the development of students' character and skill. So the characteristic of curriculum Merdeka is project-based learning with a student center. The next slide is about 6 English skills that are found in the curriculum Merdeka that divided into two. The first one is receptive skills, included listening, reading, and viewing, and the second one is productive skills, including speaking, writing, and presenting. So the next slide, it's about analysis of learning outcomes or CP. The learning outcomes are based on the rationale that students are expected to be able to communicate with people from other countries who have different cultural background. Moreover, the student able to use English independently to achieve communication goals, both oral and written. So the types of text that included in the curriculum Merdeka, there are narrative, expository, discussion, and descriptive. And for this lesson plan, I choose narrative text for this phase F. And the next slide is about analysis of curriculum structure and content. So based on curriculum Merdeka, the time allocation for English subject for grade 12 is about 45 minutes. So in one semester typically consists of approximately 16 effective weeks. So in this phase F, learning material focus on students' ability to understand and produce by their own work. So the next slide is formulating learning objective or TP. So I formulated this TP. It is included, the first one is about students are able to identify the elements of narrative text such like orientation, complication, and resolution. Next is students are able to explain the plot and moral value of a narrative text. Next is students are able to use appropriate tenses in structuring sentences. And next is students are able to analyze the structure and language features. The last is students are able to create a narrative text with a clear structure and coherent storyline. So the next slide is about lesson plan that I made for class 12 in phase F. The school is in SMA N 26 Kabupaten Tangerang with time allocation 45 minutes with 2 JP. And I choose learning outcome for this phase I choose the elements of listening and speaking. So initial competencies, students are able to listen and speak in English, discussing language structure, elements, and features in narrative text. So the learning model I choose is GBA, which is genre-based approach. And I made learning objective with two learning objective. The first is students are able to identify the elements of a narrative text through listening activities, and the second one is students are able to retell the content of a narrative text orally in a structured and clear manner. So this is the lesson plan I made. For the main content is narrative text with short fairy tale. The media I choose poster, PPT, and laptop. And for the leading question that I will share to my students is the first, what is narrative text? The second is, what is the function of narrative text? The third, what do you think narrative text consists of? The fourth is, what kind of verb is used in narrative text? So the next slide is about the learning activities. For the opening, the teacher greets the students, and then the teacher leads the student in prayer, and also the teacher takes attendance. And after that, the teacher will lead the student to do a vocabulary practice. And after that, the teacher explains the activities to be carried out. And the next slide, it's about the main activities. So the main activities I use building knowledge of the field, which is BKRF, and show picture of short story. So the teacher read the story while the student is listen. And then the teacher asks what elements are present in the narrative text. and the students share experiences about their stories, and student with the teacher analyzing the character, and also the teacher asks about the vocabulary they commonly encounter in stories. So the next is for the main activities, use modeling of the text or MOT, and the teacher read the whole stories while the students listen. So the teacher will give fairy tale stories, and the students is listening to the teacher. So the teacher explains the structure and then ask students to restate the structural elements. And then students and teacher identify elements such like characters, setting, the problem, and how it resolved. So and then also identifying linguistic features such like time expression, verbs, and adjective. So after that, the teacher asks the student to write a summary from the fairy tale and presenting orally in the front of the class. And the next slide is about the assessment. So I made two assessment. The first one is diagnostic assessment. This is the content of this diagnostic assessment is answer and question orally. So the question for this diagnostic assessment, the first one is, have you ever read or watched a fairy tale? The second one is, what usually happens in a story? So the purpose for this assessment is 1. To find out whether students are familiar with stories in English. 2 is to determine whether students understand the basic elements or structure of a story. So for the formative assessment, I made a formative assessment. So whether students are able to retell the story coherently by using appropriate vocabulary and understandable pronunciation. So for the rubric assessment, you can see for the component there are content, language use, pronunciation, and vocab. So for the scores criteria, there are assessment criteria for each item. Very poor, from 1 to 5, poor 6 to 10, fair 11 to 15, good 16 to 20, excellent 21 to 25. And also the assessment criteria for TP is 0 to 71 is not yet reached completion, and 72 until 100 has reached completion. So for the enrichment and remedial, I made a remedial instruction. The first is a plan for providing specialized guidance either individually or in groups. So for the enrichments, students independently study the topics covered in the class. And the next slide is about reflection for teacher and students. So the teacher reflection answered the following question. First is what I have done to support my students so that they can successfully carry out activities related to the material covered in this lesson. The second is what challenges did I encounter during the learning process. And the last is what efforts or strategies did I use to improve my students' knowledge and skills. And also the next slide is about student reflection to answer the following question. The first is what did I learn today? Second is how did I feel about today's lesson? The third is was I actively engaged in today's learning process? The fourth is what challenges did I face during today's lesson? And the last is what steps can I take to overcome those challenges? So the next slide is about conclusion. So in conclusion, in the curriculum Merdeka for senior high school in phase F grade 12 is designed to develop students' communication skills, critical thinking, creativity through student-centered approach. So the design of this lesson plan hopefully can help the teacher to create lesson activity. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry if I have a lot of mistake. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.